This week in MDP, in week 11, the focus is going to be personal development planning. And I'm going to talk to you in the session today about what we mean as personal development planning here at Strathclyde, and specifically within the business school, and take you through the different stages involved in it. You're going to engage in a number of tasks this week, which are going to look at an individual level and then a team level at how you're going to engage in PDP, and you're going to come up with a plan for yourself and for your group for the remainder of your first year, so for the next 6 months. So, what is PDP? Well, PDP is an acronym, is generally taken to stand for Personal Development Planning. And it's a very specific activity, but it's not a one-off activity. So it's an ongoing activity that you engage in, where you look at your careers and your development goals and put in place a plan that will help you achieve what you need to in terms of your development. It's a very broadly defined process, and anyone can engage in it, and it can be used in a number of different contexts. Specifically within the higher education context, PDP has actually been a requirement for universities to provide an opportunity for you to do this at undergraduate level for a number of years now. So this is something that at a government level they require us to make sure that while you're engaged in your studies at Strathclyde, that you're actively participating in PDP. So you will hear more and more about this particular term and the activities surrounding it as you progress through different years in your academic studies. So what is PDP? What do we mean by PDP for you just now? Well, basically, put simply, it's a three-stage process. So it's about looking at what your overall goals and objectives are, deciding about where you want to get to, and actively considering what your long and medium-term goals are. So you're wanting to think about and define your career and development goals. Once you've done that, you know basically where you're trying to get to. The next stage is about deciding where you are just now. And what's involved in that is for you to evaluate your current position in terms of where you want to get to. The final stage is to then plan getting from where you are just now to where you want to be. And that plan has got to be fairly active, and there are a number of different elements involved in that planning process to make it explicit, to make sure that you actually do this. Now, one of the advantages and the key reasons that you do PDP is when people more explicitly manage their development, they're likely to achieve much more. So it's a very important process for you to engage in as a professional, to make sure that you're continually developing yourself and mapping into where you want to go in terms of your career and development overall. So what I'm going to do in this session is to consider these three stages and what will be involved in each one of these. So the first task is to decide what you wish to achieve in terms of both your personal and your professional development. So you have to decide on your goals, and these are longer term goals to begin with. So the first thing to think about is, what do you want to achieve after university? For some of you, you may have already in mind a particular job in a particular sector that you might be interested in. You might have an idea of the kind of company or the kind of role that you would want to do. If you do, you're fairly unusual for someone who's in first year in university. For most of you, you probably have more of a generic idea of what you want to do after you've finished university. And that might be to achieve a good degree, to get a job that's well paid and that you enjoy. And that's fine. These more generic ideas are what most people will have. Some of you at this point won't actually be even sure what their principal subjects will be. So you don't really know what you will be graduating with, what will be on your parchment. And that again is fine at this particular point. Because generally, most people, the goals that you have to have are about what skills and experience you want to get. So they are much more tangible than your overarching goals. So what you can think of is, what's easier for most people is, what do you want to achieve at university? So when you get to the end of your degree, where do you want to be as a person? What position do you want to be in when you're actually looking at that next stage? We face different stages in our career, and while you're at university, that stage is to do with looking at where you want to be by the end of your studies, what you want to gain from it. So you might have much more specific goals about your university career. You might have a goal in terms of the classification that you want to leave with, and that will, as a result, impact on the skills and the knowledge and the experience that you need to gain while you are here. So, there are a number of different attributes that are generally put together to describe graduates, and I'm going to introduce you in a moment to a list that employers have presented as key graduate attributes that they are looking for when they are recruiting. But before I do that, I want to introduce you to a model which was developed here at Strathclyde. And this model seeks to present, if you like, what we believe a Strathclyde graduate will have, the specific attributes that you'll gain while you are here. And as you can see, there's 6 different areas here, and they will map on roughly to the kind of things that you would expect from them. So there is an international aspect, and you probably find that key for most employers these days. There's being capable, understanding your knowledge, if you like, from your particular subject discipline. But it's also, there is quite a few areas to do with more personality-based aspects of it. So inquiring, so critical thinking and analytical skills, problem solving, and that links directly into creativity. So the idea of being creative, contributing to solutions, to being proactive as an individual. We want people to be enterprising, and here at the business school we are the home of the Hunter Centre, so the idea of business enterprise will be threaded through many of your classes, not just those of you who choose to study business enterprise. And generally at Strathclyde we believe that our graduates should be enterprising in their nature. And finally, ethical, something that is to be expected of any graduates of our institution. So these are what Strathclyde describe as our specific graduate attributes, and they are a way of thinking about how you develop your personality, your experience and your knowledge and proficiency in these different areas. But I think probably when you're in first year in particular, these aren't really as meaningful as perhaps they will become as you get later on in your degree programme. So what I thought would be more effective is to introduce you to a number of different graduate attributes that employers themselves are looking for. So what I have here to present to you is a series of 10 graduate skills. Now these skills are ones that employers have suggested that they're looking for when they're involved in graduate recruitment. So these were put together by a graduate recruitment specialist, Target, and they identified these top 10 graduate skills that in their experience employers are looking for. So these are, the first one is commercial awareness or business acumen. Now this should mean a lot to you because it's one of the key focus of MDP1. What you've been doing all of this semester is trying to get yourself grounded in business and industry and how things work. So this is about knowing how a business or industry works and what makes a company tick. Showing that you have an understanding of what an organisation wants to achieve through its product and services and how it competes in the marketplace. The second one is also one that is probably fairly easy to guess that employers are looking for. And this communication covers verbal and written communication and also listening. So it's about being clear, concise and focused and being able to tailor your message for the audience and listening to the views of others. The third area is teamwork, something that you've had a lot of experience already through the MDP programme. You need to prove that you're a team player, but also have the ability to manage and delegate to others and to take on responsibility for yourself. So it's about building positive working relationships that help everyone to achieve positive goals and business objectives. The fourth one is negotiation and persuasion skills. And this is about being able to put forward your way, but also being able to understand where another person is coming from, so that you can both get what you want or need and feel positive about that experience. The fifth area is problem-solving ability. You need to display an ability to take a logical and analytical approach to solving problems and resolving issues. It's also good to show that you can approach problems from different angles, so creativity is important here, and that links into that Strathclyde graduate aspects of creativity. The sixth area is leadership. You're not going to be a manager straight away when you leave Strathclyde, or at least it's unlikely, but graduates do need to show potential to motivate teams and other colleagues that work with them. It's about assigning and delegating tasks well, setting deadlines, and leading by good example. And this kind of links into the seventh area of organisational skills. This is about showing that you can prioritise your work efficiently and productively and manage your time well. It's also good to be able to show employers how you decide what's important to focus on and get done, and how you go about meeting deadlines. The eighth one struck me as something that's not immediately obvious as an attribute that we tend to talk about in these terms, but is a very important one, and that's perseverance and motivation. Employers want people to have a bit of get up and go. Working life presents many challenges, and you need to show employers that you're the kind of person who will find a way through, even when the going gets a bit tough. So it kind of links into the ninth area, which is that ability to work under pressure. So this is about keeping calm in a crisis and not becoming too overwhelmed or stressed. The final area is confidence. In the workplace, you need to strike the balance of being confident in yourself, but not arrogant, but also have confidence in your colleagues and the company that you work for. And that balance, I think, is probably key in this particular area. A sensible development goal would be to develop these 10 areas and have evidence of your effectiveness that you can present to an employer. Most interviews are now competence-based, so an employer will be expecting you to provide examples as evidence of your ability or that showcase your skills.